Folks, we're moving on to the Deep South colonies of South Carolina and Georgia, and this one is exclusively on South Carolina. So after completing this video, you should be able to explain why English investors wanted to create the plantation colony of Carolina. Who were these proprietors or investors, and what kind of colony did they create? How does the island of Barbados figure into the founding of Carolina? Who was the Lucas family from Barbados, and why are they important? How was Carolina supposed to run versus how did it actually operate? How did the Yamasee War change Carolina history? And then finally, how did the Yamasee War lead to the founding of Georgia? In 1663, King Charles II, who was on the throne of England at the time, son of King Charles I, granted a colony charter to a group of Englishmen who had financial interests. They were wealthy. They had those interests both in England and in the Caribbean island of Barbados. These 8 proprietors included Sir John Colleton, for whom Colleton County is named, Sir Anthony Ashley Cooper, for whom Ashley and Cooper Rivers are named, and Lord Craven, for whom Craven County was named. These were 3 of the 8, and the king gave them a charter, and so they named the new plantation colony. Remember, a plantation colony is one that's supposed to grow crops. They named it Carolina, which is from the Latin word Carolus. Carolus was Latin for Charles, so they're naming it after King Charles II. So if I were to ask you that on a test question, I would want to know King Charles II to distinguish him from King Charles I. The original colony was huge, and it contained what is now North and South Carolina in what I would call a super colony. The proprietors planned out an economy to grow luxury products and crops that people in England were spending money on in the form of imports. So they wanted the new colony at first to produce wine from grapes and also raisins from grapes. They wanted olives and olive oil. And in the original charter, the colonists would receive 100-acre grants per person, and the original plan called for workers. They were going to recreate serfs, laborers who were tied to estates. The work on these 100-acre estates would be done by serfs who would work the land for the landowners. So this was the original plan. It doesn't quite work that way. Some of the investors had property on the island of Barbados where they were getting rich growing sugarcane there, but they had also run out of space. There was no land for new people to go into business of sugarcane, and so they decided to drop the idea of the planned economy on wine and olives and olive oil, and instead take up the land themselves, take up those 100-acre estates, grow sugarcane. They hoped to grow sugarcane, and they grew it in Barbados using slave labor, and so they were going to bring both the sugarcane plants and the slave labor from Barbados to the new Carolina colony. They were going to have to transplant. These Africans had originally been brought to Barbados to replace the native Indians who had died out from disease, and the investors were planning to bring both the slaves and sugarcane, which is native to the Philippine Islands. They were going to bring all that to Carolina colony. The first group arrived in 1670 and created a settlement named Charlestown, again to honor the King Charles II. And they picked a spot where 2 rivers formed, and they named these rivers the Ashley and the Cooper for one of the proprietors, Sir Anthony Ashley Cooper. So here are all of the individual proprietors, or at least a selection of them. You get to see Cooper, you get to see Colleton, you get to see Craven, as well as the Earl of Clarendon, George Carteret, George Monk. So the planned economy did not work out too well. The sugarcane crops the Carolina colony had the wrong climate for sugarcane. They did not grow well for them. And so what these big land investors have done is bring the plants, which fail, and then bring slave labor. So they've got labor in the colony, but nothing to get them to grow. And so the very first wealth did not come from sugarcane or any crop. The very first wealth came from a deerskin trade with the local Indians, and they traded their deerskins for supplies like cotton, iron tools. The Charlestown people took the deerskins and then traded them back to England, and the skins were used in leather on military uniforms. So different members of the Creek Confederacy supplied the partners over time. One of the first trade partners were a small community of Indians called the Sewees, and later, after the Sewees died out, they were followed by a new trade partner, the Savannah Indians. The first Carolinians who got rich with that fur trade built fine summer homes on the Battery region in Charlestown, where they spent the summers to escape the scorching summer heat. And we haven't quite talked about the rice planters yet, but they will escape here from their rice plantations further out of the city. They will maintain a second home in the city and come here in August and September, not only to escape the heat, but August and September were the time of malaria and yellow fever outbreaks on the rice plantations. And so, as we know, living here on the coast, there's often a sea breeze that breaks up the heat. You don't find that inland. Desperate to locate a cash crop like Virginia had with tobacco, and since the sugarcane had not worked out, one of the planters tried rice seeds that he had brought from Madagascar, the large island off the coast of Africa, and these crops flourished in the local soil and in the local climate. And this is what the Barbadian planters put their enslaved African workers to work on to grow it. And in fact, some of the transplanted Africans already knew how to grow rice. It was grown on the west coast of Africa in particular. Groups, West African groups like the Golos were already excellent rice farmers. And so Carolina plantation owners began to ask their slave merchants to bring them only people from this tribe, the Golos, who were very skilled in rice production. Drayton Hall was one such rice plantation. Slaves opened and closed the floodgates throughout the growing season to flood and drain the rice fields. And when they were flooded, they would have about 1 inch standing water in summer heat. And as we all know, stagnant water in summer heat is a perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes that carried malaria and yellow fever. The family at Drayton Hall would leave the estate in summer and move into town in a house on the Battery. By 1700, the colony was changing. More working class people had drifted into the northern half of the colony around Albemarle on the coast. They had drifted in both from Virginia to the north and come over from Northern Ireland. And they developed a shipbuilding industry. That was their first cash product. A shipbuilding industry which is called naval stores. N-A-V-A-L, stores. Two separate words. And they built ships using Carolina pines and pitch and tar, sticky black substances used to bind the wood together and to waterproof it. The southern half of the colony around Charlestown attracted the large landowners interested in rice growing and slave ownership. And so, even though it's one super colony, we've got really people in the north who are different, pursuing a different occupation, a different economy, and then a totally different group in the south, the Barbadian planters, based around Charlestown, who have a plantation economy. Another major change really rocked the colony in 1715 in addition to the fact that it is really growing into a northern and southern colony. In spring of 1715, the problem that rocked Carolina was severe. It was a problem over the deerskin trade. The Indian trade partners at the time, these trade partners were the Yamasee Indians. And the Charlestown fur traders who supplied them with their goods like cotton cloth and metal tools had let the Indians run up a big bill on credit. And due to interest payments, the debt always got a little bit bigger each year, which the Indians did not understand. It's kind of when your credit card bill is a little bit more than you thought it was going to be this month. Well, the interest has run it up a little bit. The Charlestown fur traders had deliberately allowed this to happen, knowing that in the end, the only way the Indians could pay off the debt was to transfer their land, give away their land to their creditors. In the spring of 1715, the Yamasees came up with their own solution to their debt problem. They decided the best way to eliminate their debt was to kill all the Charlestown Indian traders and then to go after Charlestown itself and eliminate it. And so this is the beginning of the Yamasee War of 1715, and it will go on for 2 full years. On Good Friday 1715, the Friday right before Easter Sunday, the Yamasees killed their Indian traders, and then 2 days later on Easter Sunday, they attacked Charlestown. It was the beginning of a 2-year war that nearly wiped out the colony. Anybody living on the outskirts away from Charlestown had to abandon their plantation and move into the city for safety. The war resulted in 400 dead colonists, and the property damage. The Indians always burned the estates and either took the livestock, the horses and the cattle, or they killed them. The property damage was 116,000 currency pounds, which was a huge amount of money in 1715. The Carolina people began telling England that they needed a buffer zone to the south of them. They needed somebody to come forward and plant a whole new colony to the south of them, a buffer zone that would help keep Carolina safe. After the Yamasee War, Carolina colonists developed a secondary crop, nearly as lucrative as the rice culture, valuable. One of the early settlers was a woman botanist who hybridized a new crop desired by the textile industry in England. Eliza Lucas Pinckney was born on December 28th in Antigua, Barbados. Her military father moved the family to the New Carolina colony to get that land grant of 100 acres, but his military job often kept him away from Carolina for long periods of time. Eliza was smart, she was independent, and she had a talent for science. And so when she became a teenager, when she became older in her teen years, her father left one of the plantations under her control and left her totally in charge of the crop fields. She was interested in botany and in hybridizing plants, and so she developed indigo as one of the most important cash crops. Its cultivation and processing resulted in a rich blue dye that produced 1/3 of the total value of the colony's exports. So this is moving into second place wealth right behind the rice crops. It was 1/3 of the colony's economy by the time of the Revolutionary War. This is the indigo plant developed by Eliza Lucas, and its almost fern-like leaves will give up a rich blue dye when those leaves are treated with a nitrogen source. The early dye harvesters used horse urine to treat it to give up its rich blue dye. And so you would immerse the plants in the nitrogen, they would sink toward the bottom, and depending on how long you treated the plant leaves, you would either get a light blue, a deep dark rich blue, or a deep purple. And the dye would clump at the bottom of the tank, and when you dried it, it was a block that you could move and sell. Charlestown area planters brought more and more transplanted African men and women to work the rice fields and the indigo farms. They told slave merchants to bring them workers with a specialized farm knowledge. The merchants brought them the Golas from West Africa, and over time that name was changed to the Gullas. And their work absolutely made Carolina a rich and prosperous place. And you see the Gullah Geechee Corridor, a very narrow strip that runs from North Carolina down to South Florida. By 1712, the economies of Charlestown and Albemarle in the north had become so different that the proprietors decided to split the colony into the north and south halves that we know now. The colony in the north tended to attract working class people from Virginia and Northern Ireland. These people considered the colony a second chance or a second opportunity colony, and they wanted no slave labor there to take up all the jobs in shipbuilding. Workers in the shipbuilding, again the naval stores industry, got dirty working with the tar and the pitch, which were sticky and black, and they used them to seal and waterproof ships. If you worked in the shipbuilding industry, the tar was on your clothes, your skin, and people began to call those workers tar heels. The southern half became a colony for people wanting to get rich either in rice or indigo. Another way to wealth was to become a Charlestown merchant supplying goods to the planters who ordered big-ticket items like furniture and clothes made back home in the factories of England. And those would have been clothes dyed in that light blue, that rich dark blue, or that deep purple that Carolina had produced. By 1750, Charlestown was the only large southern city with a population of 10,000 men and women. In 1715, the South Carolina people wanted a buffer zone placed south of them to catch attacks from Indians if they ever happened again. And they also wanted a buffer zone to catch attacks that might come up from Spanish Florida. And Spanish Florida did not want the Carolina people in their location. They thought that they were actually trespassing on Spanish land. So in other words, it's the South Carolina people who want a new colony that will be called Georgia.